How's the creed an expression of God's love, an invitation to God's love? And Barb unpacked what we went through on day one and then have continued to carry through, which is that the creed is God's love story. It's an encapsulation of salvation history. It reveals to us the deepest reality, which is the Trinity, God and Himself. God the Father, who makes a gift of Himself to the Son. The Son receives that gift, gives that gift to the Father, and the love between them is so real, so pure, so true, so personal, that love is the procession of the Holy Spirit, the third divine person. So the deepest reality is love, and that's revealed through the creed. The creed has a Trinitarian formula that Barb just unpacked and walked through. How do we know that? Because this is a big question of the new evangelization, right? We're in as Barb was teaching, I was sketching some notes, and the anecdotes were helpful too, because one of the ways that we're called to love people is not just to draw them to where we are, which is to say in relation with Jesus Christ, but to do what God does and to meet them where they are. The majority of people that we'll encounter in contemporary culture are not believers in the good news of Jesus Christ. They're not. The majority are not. Either professed explicitly in their words or implicitly through our actions. So we almost need to then say, well, do we need to then say, but what if it's true? If someone assumes it's not, the challenge is, what if it is true? What if it is true? Well, the eternal perfect love of God in Trinity is revealed to us in Jesus Christ. How do we know? So the question, how do we know that's true? How do we know that's true? Because of the credibility of Jesus Christ. Because Father Ronnie and Monsignor Gust and Jimmy and this other cloud of witnesses revealed to me, not just in their words, but through their deeds, that love is the deepest reality. Through their marriage, through their friendships, through their work, through the encounters that we've had, that when I was not worthy at all of love, they showed me what love was. And when I asked them, implicitly or explicitly, why? They said, because He loved me first. Because there's a relation that's made present in mystery, that was first made present in the Incarnation in history, and that as Catholics we look forward to, and I'm going to go through this briefly later, but we look forward to when He comes again in majesty, for we are all of us on a journey. So how is the creed an expression of God's love? Well, it's God's love story in the Trinity, which is the central mystery of the Christian faith, made present through this second mystery, which is the Paschal mystery. And that's what we're going to be exploring in some of the other pillars here. But how do we know some of these different pieces here? How can we meet people where they are without really discerning where they are? Consider, if you look at the breakout session here, consider the end of the Apostles' Creed, so the last part of the Apostles' Creed, and the beliefs that are expressed there. The first one's the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. And quite conveniently, we've got 4 tables and we've got 4 questions here. The first question, and maybe we can, if this table wouldn't mind taking that, what impediments, what challenges within culture, so what major assumptions do people have, are there to understanding what communion is? If we talk about communion of the saints, do we have communion in our families? So that people can have that analogy, that icon to look forward? Do we have communion in our friendships? I wonder, was there ever a time when the word frenemies, was something that's being debated and put into a dictionary? So do we have these icons of communion to be able to look to? Because we got to meet that culture on its terms where it is, and then draw them there, which is the movement of love, to the fullness. So y'all are going to explore number 1. Number 2, if this table would take it, what impediments are there to understanding what forgiveness is? There are horrors that people experience. We have Immaculée coming in soon, right? What a beautiful, if you get a chance, please go. If you get a chance, please go see what Christian forgiveness looks like in the face of an African woman who lost her entire family to hatred, to insane, bigoted hatred. Look at what that looks like, because nothing else explains that. Nothing explains that except the love of Jesus, who is the Christ, and the mystery of His passionate love on the cross. Okay, so what y'all are going to do is you're going to see what impediments are there to understanding what forgiveness is. Do we understand what forgiveness is? That it's the both and, it's the truth held in tension. G.K. Chesterton said, it is only the truth of the Catholic faith, the ultimate truth, that is strong enough to hold 2 things that seem in conflict in tension, to hold both of them without losing one or the other. Is sin real? Is the darkness and brokenness of sin real? Yes. We explored that at our last meeting, right? We saw the 4 fractures of sin that you can see just by turning on TV. those 4 fractures. That darkness exists. That darkness exists. We see it. We experience it. But the and is there a light? Is there a light that shows us what the meaning and purpose of suffering is, and thus opens up what forgiveness really is? If we think forgiveness is saying, it's really not that bad, don't worry about it, it's not that bad, then guess what? There's no way you can forgive what happened to somebody who says, no, you don't understand, it was that bad. So if y'all can help us by exploring, what are contemporary understandings of what forgiveness is? Do most people understand forgiveness through the Paschal mystery and the meaning of the cross, or do they think either it means something isn't so bad, or with a very strict sense of justice, there's no such thing as forgiveness, an eye for an eye? So if y'all would help us to understand that, because if we're going to meet people where they are, we got to know what their assumptions are, and most of us have a very good sense of what that is. Number 3, and maybe this table can take that, what does our culture think of the body? The body. If we're talking about resurrection of the body. We talked before, and I'm sure a number of people have said this, but there's really no such thing as a new heresy. You know, when you study the heritage of the church, you realize that from the beginning, people had misguided notions, took one thing, held it up, and said, this is everything, when in fact it wasn't. Okay, well, Gnosticism is a perennial heresy. Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code, all of that stuff. Spirit good, matter bad, and everything that follows from that. So if we're going to talk about resurrection of the body, what contemporary notions of the body are there? Okay, so if y'all wouldn't mind unpacking that. And then number 4, here, in life everlasting, what are some ways the culture thinks of time? Are actions seen as having eternal consequences? So if we look at life everlasting, do most people live as if the decisions they make today can have eternal consequences? What are most people's notions of what life is? Gather your rosebuds while you may, perhaps? So if y'all wouldn't mind, and by the way, we're not talking about the mode of faith at this point, right? We're not talking about what has been divinely revealed. We're talking about what you could begin with anybody in a coffee shop with. Anybody, which is reason and experience. Reason and experience. If y'all have any questions in your 4 individual groups, feel free to shoot those, but discuss them a little bit first. You might also notice that the challenge of the questions is steeped up a little bit, right? We've tacked up just a little bit on that. What are some ways that we can understand what culture believes? How about movies? How about television? How about advertisements, prints, in magazines as well as billboards? How about music? Maybe even art, architecture, this stuff, if you want to push it that far?
Started off by defining what we thought communion is, and that is the unity that connects all of us with the life of Christ. And of course, all of us are at different levels in that communion with Christ, with God. But the impediments that keep us from getting to that point or divert us along the way, of course, is our culture, our secular world that we live in that is full of all sorts of things that are against communion with saints. And it goes back to what you started with earlier, or last time, and that is the power, the pleasure, and prestige that that people feel, and that's tantamount in our culture. And we see it with the materialism that's out there, the families that have breakup of families, and what goes on with all of that. The fact that there's no accountability, and of course the social media that exists in the world today, and what that does to us getting closer to God. That's pretty much kind of a synopsis, I think. Help me there. And yeah, of course, the individualization is the main thing, and it's all about me, which was true.
It's all about you, Jim?
It was. Absolutely. That's it. That's true. Yeah.
Before you met what?
Before I met, well, it took a long time after that, too.
I grew up with always having one big family meal at dinner time, and I raised my daughters that way. What I saw was when they got into teenage years, they were bringing their friends home, their boyfriends and their girlfriends and stuff. And they were amazed that we all sat at one table in evening time and had dinner. And community is basically you want to have everybody together, and everybody has their part. And as a whole, the church as a whole, we are the body, the whole thing. If we're not all together, then we're going to fall apart. Chop off your arm, it's going to die. The rest of your body can still live, but if you put everything together, then you've got the whole picture. And what's happening nowadays with social media and with the family and things, we're separating all those parts. And those parts aren't going to be able to be very good by themselves. And we're suffering greatly because of it.
We are made for love that's ordered toward communio, ultimate communio or communion with God, but a communion also that never, ever, ever allows us to say, Lord, it's just you and me, as if there's kind of a narrow Protestant type sense, as opposed to you and me necessarily includes Jimmy, necessarily includes each and every one of us here. So one of the rays of hope in that is, this was an insight that I had relatively recently, I realized I have to do better establishing within my home, just as our Lord gave me a certain dominion over my body, and my job is to give my mind, my heart, my spirit, and my strength to Him so that He can reign there. As for me and my home, we shall serve the Lord. He's got to reign in my house too. So I have to establish at the house the culture that can be distinguished from the culture at large and is very attractive. Somebody that did that really well was my in-laws. If you dated, they had 3 girls. I was just telling Barb, all 3 of them, blonde, brunette, redhead. And now with my girls, I got a blonde, a brunette, and we'll see if God blesses me here too. But you knew if you dated one of those girls, you weren't really going out a whole lot. A fun Friday or Saturday night was you went and you played games at their house. They would play puzzles. My wife is now instituting this just on the natural realm, not even the supernatural, making puzzles with my babies. So that they always have that alternative. It's like, no, this is fun. I can pretend like it's fun to go, do the whole New Orleans type thing, but this is fun. And you always knew that. And that's how we can offer something that's distinguished from the rest of it. So we need to begin with that culture, I think, right there. The social media, I think, was helpful to look at too. There's certain good things, but also some challenges. One of the real rays of hope with the new evangelization, though, is that if the nature of the social dimension is that we're made for communio, if it's falling apart in all of these places, then there's going to be a real distinction in those places where there's authentic communio and a real family-type culture. Just like what did we do, why are there within the catacombs of Rome, why are there little bitty, little bitty places with the remains of little babies? Well, it wasn't that so many Christian babies were still born. It was that the Roman practice was, if you didn't want your child, you would just expose them. You would just put them outside so that the elements of the dogs would get them. Well, as Christians, we understood that we are parents, that communio extends to everybody, especially the weakest and defenseless among us. And so what they would do is they would go and they would pick up these little babies, and they would love them, and they would hold them, and they would try to feed them and try to care for their material needs, but they would also baptize these babies. And they would love these babies unto death, and then they would offer them a Christian burial. So part of what we need to do is to realize this communio extends beyond, because people are going to look to us for what that looks like. We need to provide that culture. So that was really, really helpful. We need to reestablish the icon that points to the ultimate reality that happens in God.
Forgiveness, we talked a little bit about unconditional love. In other words, to forgive someone, I think you alluded to the question, what is our understanding of what forgiveness is? Forgiveness is what God does with us. As far as the east is from the west, He forgives our sins. And the only way He could do that is through unconditional love. And so we too have to emulate that unconditional love. We can't put conditions on people and what they do to us. And so part of what leads into what impediments are there to understanding what forgiveness is, well, if we have impediment, if we put conditions on things, if we expect people to be who they are, and naturally that's what we do as human beings, our expectations are there, and so our expectations get in the way of forgiving those people. If we perceive someone speaking a certain way, in other words, if they're saying one thing and we're perceiving it another way, then we get angry, or our emotions start to boil. then we're not necessarily truly listening to what they have to say. And so that can become an impediment to forgiveness. The other thing is social media. The lack of interpersonal, one-on-one, face-to-face communication becomes an impediment to forgiveness because we perceive things to be a certain way because we can't see all of the body, whatever you call it, interpersonal.
When I first saw this question, I'm going to say it the same way I said in our group here. I kind of quickly jumped to number 4 because I thought our table was going to get number 4 on time. Okay? So maybe I'll steal somebody's thunder from over here. I don't know. Just like time, our bodies are not our own. And so they're a gift of God, and they're the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so we ought to treat our bodies with the utmost of respect and even love ourselves. And I think when we begin to love ourselves, love the body that God gave us, then we can really see how we're supposed to be called closer to the Spirit. And that love for our bodies just connects us to the Spirit, because the two, unfortunately, we live in this life, we suffer in the flesh, but we also embrace that suffering. And so that brings us, and also there's also a connection with the body of Christ, with the church. And in the Spirit, that's where the Spirit draws us as well, to see that connection with the body as individuals in the church.
Where are most people getting formed? The two major places we're supposed to be formed are in the church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the domestic church, which is the home. Those are the two places that we're supposed to learn the most profound truths that there are. G.K. Chesterton, when he talked about what it was to be a housewife, was kind of addressing why it was that women are called to be mothers and to be housewives. And it's because men can't be trusted to form an entire human soul. That it is the gift of woman to be able to contemplate the whole, an entire human soul, and to give herself fully and wholly to that, and the dignity that's there. Well, do we have that today? Do we have a lot of formation happening in families, or is there such brokenness that we don't get the answers to the biggest questions? I think the answer is, yeah, there's some brokenness there. And are many people turning to the church for the answers, which we're going to explore in the 4th formation next month? Are they looking to the church for the answers that are revealed to the deepest questions? The answer is no. In many cases, the answer is no. We do that churchy stuff there if it makes me feel good, but beyond that, not so much. So where are people being formed? Where are they being formed? Society, right? But what are the incarnations of that? Well, most people watch a whole lot of TV, right? Our peers influence us a lot. We also consume a lot of television, maybe music, especially for younger people, that, has a real effect. Movies have a real effect. I remember it was, I was looking at Netflix and the different things they had. They had 2 different movies that reflected a cultural phenomenon called Friends with Benefits. If you've ever heard of just how pathetic this is, it means people that can use each other sexually with no emotional connection. It's almost like we both enjoy tennis, so we'll play that together, but it doesn't mean we're like joined in a tennis group. It's just this is what we do. Well, there were 2 movies at the same time on there. One was called Friends with Benefits, with big actors. Ashton Kutcher, who's a big actor, was one of those. The other one was No Strings Attached. 2 movies with the same exact theme doing that. So if that's how we're learning, if law is instructive, which it is, right? If we went into a place and we kind of opened up our eyes and we said, okay, I've never been here before, tell me, a little bit about it. And the guy said, well, let me show you our law book here. Child abuse, you have to pay a nickel fine, and that's it. What would we say that they think about kids or about the family? They'd say they have no respect for kids, right? Our laws instruct. Our laws instruct. Economics, politics, all of this is instructive. Well, let's think, what do we think of the body? I think of that poor little girl, Sandra Fluke, the Georgetown, Catholic University, Georgetown law school student who said that everyone, including us, as Roman Catholics, should be compelled to pay for her contraceptives, because she and her sisters, it's such a burden, to be sexually promiscuous and to have to pay for their own contraception throughout all of law school. It might, whatever that was. Does this little girl have any idea what a body is? Any idea? No. What a sad little girl at a Catholic institution, right? At a Catholic law school, what a sad institution. So if we're talking about resurrection of the body, the majority of people we're going to encounter have Gnostic preconditions, presuppositions, Gnostics, which is spirit good, matter bad. I worked, when I was in law school, I worked for a coalition that protected children and families, and my research was in trafficking, so in abolishing contemporary slavery. And one of the things that this apostolate, and it was a Protestant group, used to do was they used to help girls to break free from pornography, from stripping, from being strippers. And there were certain things that all of them had in common, every single one. One was that the guys that would get them involved with this they would get them to buy a whole bunch of stuff they couldn't afford so that they would be credit slaves. You know, they could never make enough to be able to do that. The second thing was they'd get them hooked on drugs, which was really easy, because as much as they would use their bodies as tools, the human person is made for integrity. He's made for integrity. We're made in the social dimension for integrity. Take one of us and isolate us without that connection in prayer that connects all of us, and you get a person that eventually goes kind of crazy, kind of nuts. We're made for that. So if you take a person and have her, encourage her to use her body as a tool, there's a disintegration that happens there that is so painful that you have to medicate. You have to say, doctor, dealer, you got to give me some medicine because I can't feel what I have to feel to continue to do this. So if our contemporary notions of our body are either that the body should be worshipped, or that the body's dispensed with, we can use it as a tool, then that means that such notions as resurrection of the body will really have no traction at that point. So if we can't begin with what's true in culture, then what we need to begin with is what's lacking there. Has this really made you happy? Does this really make sense? Do you really imagine that all you are is some spirit floating around and that this body means nothing? Is that how your life has evinced that? Or is there something special about this body? And then eventually lead them to the wounds of Christ. I love how in the Catholic tradition, it's not like a martyr goes through a horrific torture, and then the next thing you see is there are no scars at all, right? There's just a purification, as opposed to in all of the beautiful artwork that we have of the martyrs, what are they all holding? They're holding the instruments of their torture. Some of them are holding their own severed heads because God's glory shines through that. The resurrected, the glorified body will be glorified through the means by which they showed their love. In the end, when even faith and hope are dispensed with and everything is dispensed with, what will remain is love. Love. Our bodies matter. Our bodies matter. And it's the Roman Catholic faith that will be the last voice. Notice, I didn't say one amongst a few, but the last voice that offers testimony to this. The reason I say that is that the notion that Muslims have is a different notion. Islam means submission. It doesn't mean son and daughtership. Okay? Our evangelical Protestant brothers and sisters at this point are still doing something that's along those Gnostic lines, which is utilizing artificial contraception. Okay? So that's why I say that the Catholic Church is the last voice that will offer this. One of the graces is that inconsistency is leading a lot of them to ask questions like, how does that make sense? You know, if it's really true that every single act that I commit, every single act that I engage in is to be an act of worship to God, then how is the act of dispensing with some form of contraception or holding back some part of myself really an act of worship? How is that the case? So one gift is that as we draw together, especially in the social apostolate, people get to ask questions and begin to really see what this looks like. It's also a chance for humility for us. How many of our people in the Catholic Church, those that attend Mass, are also acting that same way? Does that mean we have a lot of work to do? Of course it does. It means we got to speak truth in a profound, a gentle, and a persevering love.
We talked about the aspect of time and how it's so age-related. As a teenager, you believe you live forever. They don't realize how choices that they make now affect lives later and eternally, and how they could affect others. We have such a me society, such a now society. It's very selfish, not looking out for anyone else. Not only socially, but like environmentally as well. You know, what we do now in our environment affects later. as we get older, time becomes more significant. We're faced with our mortality, either through our own health issues or health issues of our loved ones or deaths of loved ones and things like that. A sense of time is for our own use instead of for God's use. We make time for what pleases us and not what pleases God. It's misplaced priorities. And our time is so short and should be so precious. Karen said the sacrament of the moment, and every moment we should see it as a sacrament to encounter God.
Wonderful, the sacrament of the moment.